Welcome to Our Canada, Our Future. I'm Aaron Woodrick. On today's show, we're going to be talking about a cultural phenomenon that's taking on increasing prominence these days, something called critical race theory. And to do that, I'm pleased to be joined today by Jamil Jivani, president of the Canada Strong and Free Network, and a senior fellow at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. Jamil, thanks so much for joining me today.
Yeah, great to be with you, Aaron.
I think maybe we should just start with the basics. A lot of people may have heard this term, critical race theory or CRT, but maybe you can sort of give us the elevator pitch version of what exactly is critical race theory.
Yeah, I think a lot of Canadians might recognize critical race theory from American news and American culture wars. It did start as an American idea in Columbia University's law school, in New York University Law School. And it began as a way of acknowledging that different laws and policies might impact different communities and different individuals in unique ways because of their history, because of their race, because of their identity, which is a pretty fair idea, right? It started off as a fair point, I think, and that's why it wasn't very controversial when it began. But it has evolved outside of American law schools and now become a dominant governing ideology in institutions, in businesses, in different organizations, influencing how we think about law, how we think about policy, how we think about our identity, patriotism, nationality. And ultimately, what it's turned into is not just a point that, hey, maybe racism could be relevant to this law or this policy. Now it's turned into an assurance, a guarantee that there must be racism everywhere. And it's asking us, if you don't see the racism, to look for it. And that's a real problem, because what it's doing is essentially arguing that in a diverse, multicultural country like Canada, we cannot have race neutral laws and policies. Everything we do, everything we are as a country has a racial component to it, according to critical race theory. And that's why terminology has become so pervasive these days that reflects that ideology. Nowadays, when you hear a term like systemic racism or white privilege, sounds like normal, right? 5 years ago, it wasn't normal. And that's because critical race theory has grown so quickly.
Now, you've said a lot. I want to unpack some of it. I mean, your first point, of course, was that this sort of started in American universities and it's somehow escaped academia. What are some of the examples that Canadians might be familiar with? Are there any sort of prominent examples of where critical race theory has been in the news in Canada, just as an example of how it's sort of spilled over here north of the border?
Absolutely. So one of the clearest examples that we could take a look at comes from our federal government, Global Affairs Canada. They've incorporated critical race theory in their training of government officials. So if you want a job now representing Canada in one of our embassies, working in the world of diplomacy on behalf of this country, you are now being forced to do training where they're telling you that ideas like timeliness, which this sounds crazy, sense of urgency, mathematics, like that these concepts are now white, that if you are a non-white person, it is somehow an offense to you to be told that these sorts of things are important. It's very racist thinking. And yet that is what critical race theory has done to some of our institutions. Another clear example, just earlier this year, almost every single member of the Ontario Provincial Parliament across all parties voted in favor of what was called Bill 67, which would have mandated the teaching and practice of critical race theory in Ontario public schools. So you can look these examples up and you'll see this ideology has grown very quickly, very fast in our side of the border.
Very interesting. And, I guess a question for people who aren't quite sure on the difference between critical race theory itself and sort of just general awareness of racial differences. What is the difference? What is distinct about critical race theory from the idea that we just need to be more aware of the fact that different things might impact people of different color differently?
Well, critical race theory, one, demands that there cannot be a law or policy in our country that does not have a racial component. And what that means in practice is that someone like me is being told, you're always going to be a victim, no matter how hard you try, no matter how much our country changes, you will always be oppressed. That's the difference.
Yeah, it's a pretty significant difference, being aware of something or being told something must be. Lots more to unpack here, but I want to take a short break and we'll be back with Jamil Jivani after this. Welcome back to Our Canada, Our Future. We're talking about critical race theory with Jamil Jivani, president of the Canada Strong and Free Network. Jamil, we talked earlier about how CRT, critical race theory, has its roots in academia. What sort of happened? You mentioned sort of in the last 5 or 10 years, there's been a sudden change. What triggered this in your view? How did this spill over from sort of being an idea that was just circulated in academic circles to something that's now so prominent in many other institutions, including business and government?
I think there are a couple things going on here. So first off, there is and has always been a group of activists, of intellectuals, politicians who really don't like what Canada is. And sometimes for good reason, they might oppose things that in our history that have been unjust, but they want to transform this country. They want to fundamentally transform our institutions. And they don't like some of the core bedrock of what Canada is and where it's come from. Things like capitalism, British style parliamentary democracy, the influence of Christianity in our culture. And they're always looking for ways to criticize Canada and to make us so defensive that we allow for radical changes to occur. And critical race theory appeals to people who don't like Canada, who want to radically change Canada, because it has proven to be a very effective way at neutralizing opposition to radical change. If you can convince a large number of people that believing in Canada and loving Canada and wanting to protect our institutions, preserve our history and our culture, if you can convince people that that's racist, that really diminishes their willingness to push back. And I think that's a big part of why critical race theory has become so popular. Some people think it's about helping Black people, it's helping minorities, it's doing something for the disadvantaged. But the truth is that it's popular among elites. It's popular among people who are in universities, in ivory towers. It's popular among activists who live in expensive zip codes and postal codes. It's just not an ideology that resonates with working and middle class people. So I think that's a big part of why it's been so popular. It's an effective tool for those who want to deconstruct and destabilize Canada. The other reason I think it's been popular, Aaron, to be honest with you, is that there are a lot of wealthy and privileged people of all races and backgrounds who want to feel like they're good people and enjoy their privileges and their wealth in a way that makes them not feel guilty. And if they can virtue signal and look like they are thinking about others by embracing things like critical race theory, then it allows for them to reconcile the fact that they have maybe a heart for the disadvantaged, but they benefit a lot from the status quo.
Interesting. So a way to sort of absolve themselves of the guilt of the sort of advantages that they might have. But I want to get back to your first point there because I hadn't thought of it this way, but it sounds like this critical race theory is in a way sort of a Trojan horse to attach racism, which everyone agrees is bad, to a bunch of other ideas which some people might like or might not like. But in other words, if you attach, for example, a market economy and capitalism to racism, you sort of stain that as well. And so is that sort of what you were getting at when you were saying the people who don't like Canada and don't like its institutions, they've latched onto CRT as a way to sort of advance a whole set of ideas when really the only thing that everyone agrees is bad is racism. And by framing all these things as racist, they effectively get people's buy-in for the whole package?
That's exactly right. And I can give you a very clear example to illustrate that. Critical race theory emerged in the public square around the same time that we started to hear about ideas like defunding police departments. And people would tell you, well, this sort of critique of our law enforcement, critique of our criminal justice system is for Black people. It's for the working class. It's supposed to be helping the disadvantaged. But the University of Toronto and the Wellesley Institute just published research a few weeks ago where they surveyed working class and minority communities in Toronto, all of whom their number one ask of their politicians was, we want safer streets and we believe part of safer streets is more cops. So critical race theory takes an idea that Black people and working class people don't even support, like defund the police, and turns it into something that makes a lot of people think it's for our benefit, that it's somehow about racial justice or racial equality. That's not what it's about at all.
Right. And so by attaching defunding the police to racism, it would make people feel like if they oppose that idea, they would be racist.
Exactly. And that's part of the game that critical race theorists are running on the Canadian public. If you make every idea they don't like racist, then we'll be too scared to defend our country.
Yeah, fascinating stuff. We're going to take a short break and be right back. Welcome back to Our Canada, Our Future. We're talking about critical race theory with Macdonald-Laurier Institute Senior Fellow Jamil Jivani. Jamil, you recently had a piece in the National Post about a project that the Macdonald-Laurier Institute had done that was platforming a variety of voices from people of color discussing some of the problems with the critical race theory. So I was wondering if you could share a bit about that with us.
Absolutely. Well, the power of ideas like critical race theory is that they make you think that everyone who looks a certain way must think and experience the world in a certain way. And it's just not true. So one of the ways we wanted to highlight the real diversity within all communities across Canada, not a single ethnic, racial, cultural group in this country all thinks the same way. And that's a beautiful thing. We have real diversity of thought and experience in this country. So the way we wanted to highlight that was to bring in people who have different views on critical race theory, who disagree with this notion that if you're a person of color, that means you're a victim. If you're a person of color, that means you cannot be equal to your white neighbor, your white brother, your white sister, who want to push back and say, you know what, Canada has its problems, but it's certainly not perfect, but it is a great place for people of all these different backgrounds to make a life for themselves and for their children. So we reached out to parents, to students, activists, we've got journalists, a professor, all sorts of different people contributed, representing cultural backgrounds from across the spectrum: Jewish, African, Caribbean, South Asian, Middle Eastern. It is a truly diverse group of Canadians who are all giving their point of view and saying, look, this ideology, critical race theory that claims to speak for me, it doesn't, and here's why.
That sounds like a very worthwhile project. I want to talk too a bit about sort of the backlash now to critical race theory that we're starting to see. We're starting to see some south of the border, certainly. Florida is a good example of this, where the governor in Florida, he passed a bill to ban discussion of critical race theory in the classroom. So I wanted to put it to you: is this the right way to go about things? Is it a good idea to try and ban discussion of critical race theory?
Well, I think certainly for maybe some age groups, it might be worth banning, in the sense that, different things should be taught at different stages in a student's journey. But banning critical race theory outright, I do not support that at all. I think, honestly, it gives them more power, the critical race theorists and these type of racial political activists. It gives them way more power than they deserve. We're not afraid of their ideas. The Macdonald-Laurier Institute just published an essay series where a bunch of people confronted their ideas. And I don't think we need to be afraid. These ideas are weak. Our ideas are better. People who believe in Canada and the progress we've made in this country, we are going to win every debate if we're prepared. And so learning about critical race theory is not a threat to our values. It's not a threat to the status quo of good things we've accomplished in this country. It's really just a matter of how we're teaching it. If a teacher is presenting critical race theory as one of many ways to look at the world of a certain age group, I think that's totally fine. The issue we see in the school system, though, is not that it's being presented as one of many theories. It's being presented as the truth, like a new religion. If you question it, you're committing blasphemy. And that's what was so frustrating about the Ontario Provincial Parliament voting in favor of mandating critical race theory in the public schools, because even our politicians couldn't debate it. They didn't even want to talk about it. They didn't want to share different perspectives on it. So if we can't do that in our parliament, which is designed for debate, then how are we going to trust our government to present this ideology in a way that encourages real critical thinking and questioning of different assumptions about human identity and our purpose here. So for me, I think our concern should be how it's being taught, not if it's being taught.
Yeah, that's fascinating because you'd think that the clue is in the name itself. It's critical race theory, not critical race truth. So as long as it's presented as one way of looking at things among others, that's reasonable. But to be told that this is the only way to look at things, and if you don't look at things this way, then you're a bad person, that's really where the problem starts, right?
Absolutely. And we have examples of teachers being suspended for questioning whether Canada is a racist country. We've seen examples of corporations kick out a board member or high ranking employees for questioning whether Canada is racist. I mean, if we can't have debates about our country and whether it's a fair place or not, how are we going to make anything better? It's like this pressure, and this is why critical race theory is so concerning to people of all backgrounds. It creates this bizarre pressure to conform, and I don't think that's what we have wanted Canada to be.
No, absolutely not. Great points, Jamil. We're going to take a short break and be right back. Welcome back to Our Canada, Our Future. We're talking about critical race theory with Jamil Jivani, president of the Canada Strong and Free Network. Jamil, you've identified obviously a lot of the problems with critical race theory, but in particular, what makes it so bad? I mean, this is a theory that's ostensibly to help persons of color, people who are disadvantaged vis-a-vis the white majority. What makes it particularly harmful to the very people that it's supposedly trying to help?
Well, Aaron, I would say there are two big issues as far as why critical race theory is harmful. The first one is that it is so pessimistic, and that's what makes it different from the civil rights movement of the 1960s. When people were marching alongside Martin Luther King Jr., they believed that equality was possible, that if we just give people a fair chance, treat everyone like equals, make citizenship available to every person regardless of their race, that we could have an equal society. Critical race theory basically says no to that. It says we cannot have equality unless we have radical change in our society, that somehow there is a fundamental flaw with who we are as Canadians. That means we can't be equal to each other unless we give critical race theorists the power to change our country. And I just think that that's a real, I mean, it's a risky proposition on multiple levels, but I also think it's morally and factually incorrect. I think we do have a society that can be made fair and equal, and we should continue working toward that end. The other concern I have about critical race theory is that it is a massive distraction from class inequality. Working class and middle class Black families and working class and middle class white families have a lot in common. And critical race theory is basically saying, don't see each other as the same. Don't see each other as neighbors and brothers and sisters. It's saying you should be fighting with each other and competing with each other for a small piece of the economic pie. When the truth is, as working class and middle class people, we should be working together. So it hurts the standing of all working and middle class families, regardless of race, if we're distracted by our racial differences instead of uniting over a similar shared experience we have in an economy that's getting more unequal. Housing prices are going up. Inflation's making it hard to, give your kids a better life. Seems like we have a lot of problems in common.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think both of those points relate back to division and the fact that CRT almost sort of entrenches and focuses on division and says that division is not something to overcome or something to persuade people and change hearts and minds. It's something that's fixed and there's nothing we can do about it. And the only solution is to sort of burn everything down and build up new structures that put rules in place because people themselves are irredeemable. So I think you're absolutely right about the pessimism there. I wanted to get your thoughts too on whether or not you think that critical race theory is it a cause or is it a consequence of the sort of overall increase in a focus on identity politics, on different groups, on sort of our immutable characteristics. Did CRT drive that, or is CRT flourishing because that has become a bigger focus?
I think it's certainly flourishing in the last few years because it's become a bigger focus. I mean, we basically have corporations across this country, we have government offices across this country who openly define people by their skin color now as if that's a normal thing to do, who will literally advertise discriminating against workers on the basis of their skin tone or their origin or their nationality or whatever, or ethnicity, whatever it might be. So that has made critical race theory very fashionable because it allows for people who want to treat other human beings that way to feel like it's progressive to do so, when for most of human history that's not been regarded as a progressive way of thinking. In fact, it's been regarded as regressive, and I think it still should be. So critical race theory is benefiting from some of those cultural changes, but I do think it is the result of some genuine failures of elites of all races and backgrounds to do right by the working and middle class families in Black communities and white communities. So people are, looking for any way they can to have their grievances be acknowledged, to have the struggles they face be recognized. And unfortunately, for too many people, they see ideologies like critical race theory as a way to do that. And I think what we need to do as an alternative is say, no, there is another way forward where you don't have to struggle and we can pursue a better world without the division.
Yeah, that's a really good thoughts. Well, this is a really important topic, and you had some outstanding insights, Jameel. So I want to thank you very much for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you as always. And I want to thank, of course, the viewers for tuning in. We'll see you next time on Our Canada, Our Future.